And I wanted to highlight some of the things that we've discussed. We began by discussing, interestingly, the relationship between the selfie and suicide, which is a fascinating connection that was built at the beginning and sort of somehow came at the end as well with the social suicide that the selfie brought. We've talked about singular selves and multiple selves. We've talked about curating the self, managing the self, performing the self. Managing those multiple identities that we live with, maybe as a 21st century phenomenon, or maybe multiple selves have always been there. We've talked about the self as this elusive, soul-like thing that cannot be captured, and then we've talked about the many different identities that we might take on, so the identity of members of our family, the particular kinds of performances of the teenager learning to smoke in front of the mirror. Now that mirror will be a camera, perhaps. We've talked about the intimacy of technology and how a lot of the anxieties about selfies come because of the new technology that they're embodied in, that intimate technology that Eugenie spoke about, integrated into our everyday lives, technology that's become an extension of the self. We've talked about selves as fictions in many of the papers. That's been a central concern, the performance of something that's not real, whether deliberately or otherwise, whether it's that ideal self that we think of ourselves as being, we even feel in our muscle knowledge that we are, but actually is a kind of perhaps a delusion or an ideal self. So that's just a quick sort of summary, Tracy, as I see it, of some of the core things that have come up. I'm sure you've got your own ideas. So now we've got about 10 minutes or so for discussion and questions for you, points you want to raise. And there's a microphone, I believe. So when you put your hands in the air, can you wait for the microphone to come with you? Because the whole of the event is being recorded, and so we'd like to have your point as well. Straight away, a hand up at the front.
I'm quite interested in your views on whether you think in, say, 100 years' time we'll be looking at and trying to save a selfie the way that currently the MPG and the Art Fund are trying to save Van Dyck's self-portrait, and how perhaps is there the fact that, you know, the democratization of the self-portrait through the camera phone, is there a reason why that has become suddenly seen as being a moral concern, whereas if we were all painting ourselves, perhaps we'd be in an art gallery in 100 years' time?
Does anyone want to have a go at predicting the future? Eugenie? No?
No, well, I mean, certainly, I think one of the reasons we think it's such a sort of pressing moral concern is because it's so much more visible. It's the same way that the mobile phone made the banality of most of our discourse visible or audible, certainly on the bus. That alone, I think, for me, I think we've always been narcissistic beings. I think it's part of what makes us human. It's just that now we can see how narcissistic we all are and we can share it.
And what about the difference between painting? You know, people would feel very differently about a painting. Is that what you were saying, that maybe painting's seen as noble and moral, selfies immoral? It's hard to say. Oh, look at those hands. Yeah. Again, in the same row here, lady with red hair.
On a similar topic, to me, the sort of ideas about regulating selfie taking, i.e. don't do it too often, don't post it too often, it just seems to be sort of a thinly veiled way of kind of regulating the people who are taking selfies. Would any of the panel perhaps agree with that? Particularly young women, for instance?
I think there is a lot of moral concern about this debate, obviously. And I think it's partly to do with popular photographic practice being too much and too many. I've seen a lot of press articles where the anxiety seems not so much to be about the subject matter, but about the sheer volume. I had a student who said to me last year, I don't consider I've had a good night out unless I come back with 200 photographs on my phone. And that seemed to me slightly horrifying. She was deliberately saying it for effect. But I think it's to do with the volume. So it might be to do with who's taking them. It might be to do with the particular demographic group whose culture is not necessarily taken seriously. But I think a lot of it is to do with volume. So perhaps if there were less, they would be considered better. And it's ultimately an elitist point of view, I think, that kind of criticism. It's that certain people can take photographs and in certain quantities.
I think it's also got to some extent to do with what's being shared, because I mean, if you Google selfie, what you get immediately is a lot of pictures of boobs and backsides. I mean, it's partly to do with the nature of selfies and with the nature of privacy, and especially among young women, of what's appropriate to share with everybody on the planet, essentially.
Oh, so many keen people. Next door to you, there's somebody, and then I'll go up the back.
Well, not being a young woman, I was interested, and I am a great selfie taker, 6.5 years, every day. And
Is that like saying I'm an alcoholic?
yeah,
an
a bit
AA?
like that, yeah, that's it, yeah. My name's George, and I'm a selfie. But looking at it a different way, obviously being much older, is there this concept of holding on to something you know is slipping away? That I'm, 71 and time is ticking by very quickly now.
Would anyone else like to respond to that? Maybe I could say something and then we could talk about the actual sort of biological science of it. I mean, I think people have often described photography as being about memory. It used to be that memory was a kind of key concern in what popular photographic practice was about. To take a photograph is to anticipate a memory. It's to take something that you will in the future want to look back on. Some of the debates about photography in a digital culture, and partly because of that proliferation and that instant communication aspect, have slightly shifted. So they've become more about instant communication, what I ate for dinner, where I was just now. And it's less about those sorts of ideas of kind of preserving moments for posterity, and it's more about instant communication. So that, in that sense, the debate has shifted. Would you like to say,
Well, I'm kind of interested in what you do with your selfies.
I put them on Flickr.
Oh, you do? You put them on a kind of a display?
A Flickr every day.
Okay.
And I look at hundreds of selfies every day because I'm one of the moderators. And I click off the buttons where people take a picture of their dog. And I say, this is not a picture of you. And I look at, and that one of the young man, the other way around, oh, I know that. That one of the young man, I saw it a couple of days ago. The two halves, front and side.
James, have you got any?
The only things that are potentially relevant to some of the questions that have come up. So there was a recent piece of research, and I don't want you to come across as me being all negative about things, but saying that people who are at events, well, this was the press release about the paper. I've got to confess I've not read the details of exactly what they did, but the press release was about people who take photographs at events are much worse at remembering the event than people who haven't taken photographs of it. So this was very much a kind of sense of that there is potentially an experiential loss through living your life through your camera lens. And the other thing that I want to say, something that we as humans has been shown over and over again becomes one of the most important things, if not the most important thing that we care above all else, is our reputation management. So there are those in the field that believe that the highest cost function for any human being is how other people perceive them. So really now, I think this is what I was trying to get at, in the fact that with the technology, both the camera and the ability to share it is a kind of strange way in which we can amplify that effect. So it's interesting in the fact that when you were asked the question of what do you do with the selfies, they're clearly not necessarily just for your own archiving and interest. They're trying to say something to other people about yourself, and that's something that I think that we are now able to edit and have control of virtually, obviously not in real life, but in a virtual environment.
Thank you. So there's a lady there, please.
I was very intrigued by this idea of the ephemeral nature of the selfie and how maybe that is connected to the fundamental anxiety about it. The fact that you have this ever-changing self that is also an ever-changing transmitted self. And I just wonder about the idea of phototherapy and that relationship to the crystallized image of the photo album and how important that was for then reimagining and reinventing the self in a selfie way, and what the sort of future of phototherapy with this kind of ephemeral selfie might be for future generations. Like, if you're doing phototherapy but with an ephemeral self, where you don't have one photograph of your mother, but millions of photographs of your mother, probably not in an album, but in some computer in an obsolete technology, what is the future of the memory of the photographic self? Does that make sense?
That was a fascinating, complex question.
I don't know if we would still prioritise certain images. That's the question, perhaps. And one of my anxieties about the excess, because I don't even know how to manage my digital output.
Most people don't.
And so, in a sense, that's perhaps where the anxiety comes from. Not so much in the joy of taking the images, but then what to do with them. And are you actually going to say, well, out of last year, these were the ones that matter, or just leave them on the hard drive? Tend to do the second, I'm afraid. Maybe I go through them at Christmas or whatever, if I've got some spare, I don't know, hours, days now. So I wonder if we will actually take that care to go back through and say these are the ones that matter, or if we will just say it's... And maybe that's one of the things I find quite sad about the change, because I actually found quite precious the very few images that I had that were pre-selected through the fact not many were taken, many got thrown away, temporality of paper, the fact they fade. But what we've got now, of course, is the problematics about the ever-changing technologies. And I've already got about 6 different kinds of ways of archiving the digital in my flat, none of which I can access anymore. Already.
I think that's really interesting, because I think what you're saying there as well is that we're not just talking about multiple selves or distributed selves, we're also talking about diluted selves.
Yeah.
That, you know, if you've got 50,000 photographs of yourself or your mother, which one captures the essence, which used to be, as you said, Eugenie, that capturing the essence of the sort of ideal being was the essence of self-portraiture, was it not? That was what a good self-portrait was there for, was to capture that kind of essence of unique being, or that was its fantasy anyway. And so how can that be captured?
Because this isn't just a point about selfies, though. This is a point about the role of photographs.
Yeah.
Because although the digital has allowed us to take photographs easily and massively, what we do with them then has fundamentally changed, and it almost leads to a neglect of the photographic, that there are so many, the technology that we now have.
I think Eugenie's disagreeing.
Well, no, I'm not disagreeing. I just want to throw a devil's advocate remark in there. I mean, in the history of humanity, photography occupies 150 years. And we've managed to retain our sense of self and to grow it and to survive with our memories intact without photographs. So in a way, I think we may be transitioning into some really, really interesting place where the whole role of capturing and holding something forever begins to change. Because really that photographic memory is a very young idea.
We've got time for a couple more questions. Anyone else? There's a chap there in a checked shirt, please.
I'll just throw out 2 comments, really. First of all, we've been discussing selfies, but a lot of the images that we've seen tonight are in fact photographs of people executing a selfie, which is a different phenomenon and seems to be growing in popularity, if you like. And the second point for our motor neuron man is I play online poker and seem to have a knack of deciding good poker players and risk takers by the kind of image, the selfie that they use to portray themselves. It's that kind
so
of
that's a new play on the poker face. It's the poker selfie face. That's really interesting.
It is interesting how certain people, the brain says, that person's going to be stupid. It's going to be a high-risk taker.
I'll have them.
And
money.
they are.
Yeah. Thank you for that. Any other questions, comments, please? There's one right down at the front here, if you're able to get down here, Sarah. Thanks. Oh, is there someone at the back as well? Okay, we'll have you at the end. I can't see because you're in the shadows up there.
I just wanted to say that it seems to me that there are several types of selfies. I've got a daughter who's at uni at the moment, and I happen to be friends with her on Facebook. And they take loads of selfies, and those things are very ephemeral. They're on the spur of the moment, then it moves on to something else, and they can't be kept. Other than I found out that in fact on my Mac I can download those photographs if I want to. So I've got one idea that, one thought that I had is the moral dilemma could be about the stealing of photographies, that those people have got the illusion that it belongs to them and can then become into the public domain. That's one difficulty with that. Another thought on another front was to do with other types of selfies that we've seen today, which are incredibly interesting, fictional, creative, artistic, a development that the technology allows, which I think is extremely positive. So it's like anything that's been invented, it depends on how it's going to be used. And the third thing that I was thinking is that same daughter was given by my mother her old camera with films, old films, and she became utterly fascinated by something that I have known in my generation, but she hasn't known, which is the delay between taking a picture and then having it discovered, sending it away, having it discovered, and she absolutely adores that. And I don't think that's going to die. I think that's going to come back. It's a bit like the vinyl that is coming back after the CDs have been explored. And I do believe that those things are phases, and they might not last forever.
Thank you for those comments. I think unless anyone wants to respond to them, we might take another comment or two before we finish. Perhaps I think there was one right at the back, the lady with blonde hair there in the shadows, and that might be the last one. We've got the time. Oh, is there someone? Is it a lady with blonde hair in the shadows? Yes. Great. I think because we get thrown out, this will have to be the last one.
There you go. I don't think my question's quite as complex as some of the others, but I just wondered with the idea that it may actually be stripping away identity as opposed to giving it, in terms of people trying to compete with other people. They see someone check in somewhere or do a selfie somewhere fantastic, and they sort of feel like they need to keep up with that in some way.
So as in that sense, it's about other people rather than about yourself, then?
Yeah, I think it's sort of keeping up with the Joneses, isn't it? It's sort of, I think it's a modern interpretation of that in some way. I don't know what other
Can you
people's
think of a
thoughts are.
kind of cute neologism that you might call it, that you can circulate? Because I think you're right. You can't really call it othersies, but I think you're right that they're not so much just about the self, are they? They're about the self in a social contest.
Yeah, I just think
the self in social media.
I think that there's probably situations where people are sort of faking their selfie or where they are to make it to keeping up with everybody else.
People can call that twinsies.
Do we
What they call tweezies?
Twinsy, like a twin. Like you've got like a similar picture of someone else and you might stitch it and call it twinsies.
That's interesting. I think just as a closing thought, this idea about truth and fakery is interesting. It's come up quite a lot. All photographs are performances. They're all performances. Every single one of them is a fake and every single one of them is true. So I think, it's maybe good to move on from that some of them are real and some of them are fake. They're all public performances of the self in the kinds of photographs we've been talking about this evening.
There's one more question at the back.
I've got a flat. Is there one more? Okay, great. Thank you.
I just wanted to know what the panel thought about the relationship between the selfie and consumerism, and whether that has a major role to play, whether the sharing of products and the consuming of products has anything to do with that.
I'm sure it has. The camera's now in the frame, isn't it? It's about the camera, the technology, as well as the self.
But with things like Facebook, for example, people take selfies when they're out somewhere, and that generally requires consuming something, whether you go to a bar or you go out bowling or you go to the cinema. The root of it is consumerism. So whether that has a role to play in terms of people's self-consciousness, perhaps, and social media.
As well. Yeah. It's all sort of implicated mutually. The desire, as you said, the earlier question said, to sort of keep up with people. The aspirational culture of sort of the celebrity selfie.
I'm sure you've heard it said about certain websites that if there's nothing for sale on that website, you are the product. And that's what people say about social media, that social media is treating you as a product, and all of the tagging and all of the sort of embeddedness of the person in the photograph in a certain place is about generating tailored advertising that's aimed at you and your interests and your social group's interests. So the selfie in the context of social media has to be all about consumerism, because social media is all about consumerism. We're tied into it because we love connecting and we love socializing, and there's benefits for us in it, but the actual technology there is not a technology that's been put there for us to connect up with one another, for all the rhetoric around it. It's been put there to sell us tailored advertising. That's how it works as a business model. So I think it's a really astute point. This isn't just about the self, this is about the self and associated products.
And I mean, the data mining techniques for getting information out of images are becoming so sophisticated that I don't imagine it'll be long until they can read the labels of what you're wearing, if there is a visible label, and then target market you that way.
On that rather sobering thought, back to the connections between selfie and suicide, we come full circle. Please do go with a spring in your step as you leave the hall tonight, and keep taking those selfies. I'm glad that we had one taken from the stage tonight. That was fantastic. Yeah. Thank you all for your excellent questions. Thank you to the panel. And thank you to the organisers. Thank you to the organisers too.